All right, greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams Van Sail, here to shine a light not just on the goings on down south of the African continent here tonight, but rather to be talking about some universal principles and ideas, things that are applicable not just here to South Africa, but to other countries as well, specifically in the Western world. And here to help me is someone that I think a lot of my followers and subscribers already know. Prolific online and outside of the online world, also in the real world out there, artist Fen de Villiers. And I think, I don't know, I haven't listened to many people pronounce your surname, but I'm probably one of the few that pronounces it as it should, seeing as it is one of the, it's a very common Afrikaans surname here with its French Huguenot roots. So maybe we can start there, Fen, just your connection there. And yeah, welcome on the show.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me on. It was a great introduction. Obviously the de Villiers name comes from my father's side. He grew up in SA. He was born and raised in Cape Town, but of course he spent life sort of off and on the different de Villiers farms. I had the privilege actually a number of years ago to go out and visit a number of the farms in SA, and just to really see the extraordinary beauty of SA and the culture there, and the farm culture there, which was extraordinary. Coming across farmers who have farmed that land for so many years, it is ingrained deeply in their spirit, and I found it very inspiring. I think I've never seen so much space, such expansion of space, should we say, and such clean air, in comparison to growing up in the UK. I mean, of course, Scotland is a beautiful place and it has very clean air, but just the expanse of the space in SA and on the farmland was an extraordinary experience for me. And just seeing how self-sufficient these farmers are, and how they are bound together, getting things done out there. It's extraordinary. They've tamed the nature, and they keep pushing forward. So it's quite a inspiring. It was very inspiring trip. Let me say that.
Yeah, and as we were discussing off air, I myself am very inspired by the South African or Southern African landscape. There's such a variety of powerful aesthetics, and we're going to be getting into that as one of the themes here tonight. I mean, the Drakensberg Mountains, the Cape of Good Hope or Cape of Storms, whatever way you want to look at it, the vast expanses of the Free State, where it's so flat you can see the tomorrow already coming along. You can see into the future. The classic joke in the Free State is that if your dog runs away, you're going to see it. You're going to be able to see it still running away for 2 or 3 days. But that's the thing, and you get the Karoo Desert as well. The Karoo is a beautiful, for me, that's where a lot of my ancestors come from. So we actually went on a trip tour through the Karoo, me and my fiance. I did my previous stream just on some of the aesthetics of what I observed there. So, I mean, the list is endless. I mean, I could be talking here, but then we would not be getting into any of the topics. I could just be fawning over the absolute powerful natural beauty on display here on the African continent, but also specifically here in our little southern corner of it.
Absolutely. No, I can imagine. I'm sure it's a constant, provides constant food for your spirit to be surrounded by such glorious nature.
Absolutely, especially if you're a writer or a painter or a sculptor. Yeah. It definitely, I mean, if you just look at the most prominent South African artists, whatever their artistic craft may be, it's always some connection to the South African scenery and especially nature. Poetry and nature-based sculpting and nature painting is very prominent, specifically among Afrikaners as well. But that's the topic here tonight, is the role of art. We've already started just organically talking about how the inspiration that you can take from nature around you. But specifically, I always think, when I think about the role of art, I always go back to, I don't know if you've done the political compass, that cliche test you can do. It tells you what your ideology is or whatever. But there's one question on the political compass that I always think about when I think about the role of art. And the question, and this, remember the context now for the audience, is if you haven't done it, this political compass test is designed to now determine what your ideology is. How accurate
Right.
it is up to is up to debate. But the one question to determine your ideology is, what is more important to society, the artist or the industrialist? And I do think it's one of the more pertinent and I think heavy questions of it. Some of the other questions are quite silly and stupid, but it is one of the questions that I would also personally ask someone to determine maybe where they lie politically. I think it gets you a good idea. And I think I know where about your answer would be. The political compass only gives you a yes or no option. But if you were to be given that question, who is more important, the industrialist and the businessman, or the artist and the poet, or whatever, what would your answer be? But it's not just restricted to yes or no, or to one or the other.
Well, I think one can only look back through the extraordinary history that we've had through the, let's say, Western culture, Western canon. It's always been the images and the poetry and the storytelling that have sustained a people and have obviously energized and inspired a people to go on and keep moving forward. I mean, if you come at life, or if you come at where we reside now, one can look at what inspires you to keep moving forward and keep marching forward, or keep in that pursuit of life. It's not, I don't think we can look primarily to the petty elements of business and industrialization or industrialists or anything like that. That does not sustain the spirit. It doesn't sustain anyone's dreams. We live life through our stories and our dreams and our ideals. I think it is the artist's, and has always been the artist's, job to promote and to uplift and to provide a platform above just the petty elements of everyday life. It is to provide a place where we put our ideals, where we have our focus, our spiritual focus, shall we say. And that in itself is essentially it's the manner that keeps civilizations and the people going forward. I don't think one can ever really sort of let down the importance of that cultural thread, that connectedness to a culture, or that connected to us to the connectedness to the great pieces of art or artworks or architecture, going back and down through our history. And now, of course, where we find ourselves today, and really at this time now, where we start asking the question, where do we go from here? And how do we keep moving forward? And of course, what's going to keep on propelling a people forward? It's not simply going to be the creation of our industry or cars. It's going to be or any sort of thing that's going to drive us forward. It's going to be more about dwelling on the epic stories, and dwelling on the sort of more macro events of what's taking place on a spiritual level. And that's, of course, something where I naturally, as a sculptor, put more of my focus. I think I've mentioned many times that I don't really dwell too much in petty politics, because I don't think any of that truly matters. I think it's more the macro story of where a people are and where that people are heading. And it's a type of spiritual anchoring, but it's also a throwing that forward. And if you don't have a sustaining rich cultural element there, or if you disconnect from that, what is going to sustain you moving forward? This is a regular thing that I get into conversations about on Twitter. And as you've likely seen some of my more, let's say, inflammatory posts on Twitter, some of these threads where people, they agree with me, or they sort of attack me because I'm regularly going out there and sort of trying to get people focusing more on the aesthetic and the visual side of things, rather than getting tied up in simply just worrying about the petty politics of what's going on today.
Yeah, and before I share some thoughts there, just to show that French, you're going to influence on the Afrikaners and how deep that is. The first Afrikaner to comment in the live chat has a French surname, Marais. Hello Bradley, lekker om vir jou ook hier so te sien. Dankie dat jy ingeskakel het. All right. So on that note, Fen, I think you were talking now about not only the importance of pursuing those aesthetic things and not getting tied up and tangled in the petty politics, as you put it. But you also have to not only you don't only influence other people through your art is also inherently influenced by other artists and those that came
Absolutely.
before you, or maybe even those that are still alive. I'm
true.
going to put some of your artwork on the screen so people can see, but before we do that, can you list some of the people that or some of the artists that inspire your work, and maybe just a short reason why?
Well, you see, so much of my interest hasn't been. Okay, I'll try and paint a bit of a broader narrative here because I think it's important people get the context. My general view, or my general thesis or take on the cultural realm at this point in time now, is that so much of what I've seen going on around me on the cultural sphere, on the visual culture sphere, but not just the visual culture sphere, but so much of what's going on around myself and others is a deeply unspirited sort of art, should we say, from architecture to sculpture to painting. Some people call it postmodern or postmodern or whatever you really want to call it. I think one can take the macro view at it and consider it to be sort of unspirited. It's lacking a spiritedness. It's lacking a kind of vitality, shall we say. Found object art and this kind of lust for the postmodern and irony-driven art, or even just the sort of petty political art that you see going on today, is in its very essence, it's deeply unspirited, shall we say. It doesn't have any sort of aesthetic value. It certainly doesn't have much of a sort of a story narrative. There's nothing there that you can really become uplifted with when you're actually engaged with it. It doesn't uplift the spirit. I've often said with art, when I look at art, it either does two things to me. It either uplifts my spirit, or it sort of lowers my spirit. It either gives life or takes life from me. And the majority of the art that I was seeing while I was a student took the life force away. And I had this moment where I spent, years looking and pursuing what can be a way to capture a kind of primal essence, what can be a way to capture a kind of direct, raw essence of something that is life-affirming, but has some real power, has some real fire in the belly, shall we say. And my focus and my look sort of guided me towards looking at the Italian futurists, which I thought had in their aesthetic language a very explosive sort of direct passion that was seen unquestionably just an expression of energy. And if you look at our times now, it's like the art doesn't want to express energy. It doesn't want to express anything that is powerful. But I found within the Italian futurists and what they were doing, there was a kind of explosive, unapologetic glory. And so I looked into aspects of the Italian futurists. I looked into aspects of the Russian futurists. And I started to sort of grab bits. I also looked at Art Deco, and I started to grab bits of that. But what I wanted to formulate in its early stage over these sort of beginning years was to capture, in its most primal and geometric sense, a force and energy, because I felt that that's what was required at this time now, in a period of a period that is deeply unspirited, a period that does not allow for that kind of expression of power and energy.
Right.
And that was my starting point. And that was my sort of beginning. Of course, it's now being thrown forward and further on. And we're seeing how that's developing now. It's in the next 5-10 years, things are going to continue developing. I'm pushing further into Art Deco. I'm pushing further into looking at the British Vorticist movement, which was running parallel to Italian Futurism. But in its essence was very dynamic, was very geometric, was very sort of aggressive and unapologetic. So that gives you a general idea of what my starting point was. which of course is an interesting point to bring up, because I found that when I came onto Twitter, the starting point for, at least for a lot of people, was that the starting point for a number of, let's say, more conservative types was saying, no, we need to go even further back. We don't want to look at the 1920s. We don't want to look at the 1930s and 40s. That stuff's too, as they would say, perhaps degenerate. They wanted to go even further back to, say, the 1850s, or even going further than that and saying, let's look at Renaissance sculpture and art that has this highly refined and sort of decorative element to it. But that was not my starting point, because I felt that it had too much, to try and bring that now had too much of a sentimentality to it. It had too much of a sweetness to it. And that was something that I felt needed to be avoided, because I felt that the art today, if we are to follow a kind of trajectory, should be a return to the geometric, should be a return to the ground basis of form, and then from there refinement can follow. But another cultural movement first finds its footing in the most basic of formations and elements, and then from there refinement and a sort of maturity comes later. And so that was the general trajectory in my thesis, essentially trying to answer, or trying to put visuals to this aesthetic question, should we say.
Well, what I find fascinating, Fen, is listening to you describe the almost the thinking and the philosophy behind your art. And me, that has seen many of your artworks, I can see what you're describing manifested in your art. And that's why I actually want to put some on the screen, so my audience can hopefully see the same connection as I did now, listening to you describe exactly what you're trying to achieve. I mean, it's quite clear to me. So you have a website that I'm going to put on screen, and I encourage my audience after the stream, go check out in detail a bit more from what you can see there. So I'm just going to be putting this up here, and then we can continue the chat while this is on screen. Let me just put it like that. All right. So let's read this description first before we continue. So on your website, it says, Fen works with materials that stand the test of time, like bronze or stone. Each type of stone, each bronze finishing has its own unique character. These materials don't wear, they live. As time passes, the sculpture changes, yet never loses its vital energy. Let's actually start there, Fen, while I put some of your art here on display. Specifically, that philosophy of using bronze and stone. I mean, that speaks to me personally. I love anything bronze, seeing as exactly that. Before even reading this, I was already thinking about it in the same way, where same for me with wooden, for example, wooden furniture. It doesn't age. It just takes on different forms. It gains character. Same with leather as well for me. Any type of leather that you look after very well, like a leather jacket or a leather bound book, if you treat it the right way and you look after it the right way, it lasts forever almost, but it constantly changes, and it takes on the character of your interaction with it. I mean, my notebook that I use at work has a leather bound around it, and you can already see where I hold it when I walk or when I write in it. It takes on that personal character and becomes totally unique, and that's what I see in your philosophy here with the materials that you use as well. Can you elaborate a bit there?
Yeah, well, I mean, so much of what I wanted to do with the materials that I was using is I wanted to go to, working with bronze, working with stone, because when you work with those materials, as I've mentioned before, you're able to, you're essentially creating an artifact that will, last forever in many respects. It's completely the opposite of what's going on today in the art world, where you have pieces of work, or rather pieces of work that are created that end up, they'll never really last for 5 years or 2 years or 3 years even. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you see that's being made in the general art scene as a whole, and what's being called sculpture is not really stuff that will stand the test of time. I wanted to basically use bronze because you can also, with bronze, you can get these incredible patinations where you can burn in with fire. You can burn in these different patinations that will last, and they provide many different colors and many different sort of textures that you can literally burn into the bronze. And of course, with stone, you can do the same thing with a hammer and chisel. You can provide a kind of a texture, and every mark that is left will remain. I think it's so important that the sculpture that you're making, or that the art that you're making, can stand the test of time. I mean, I suppose one of the things that I really don't particularly enjoy about the current art scene is that everything, or majority of what's being made, or maybe it's a good thing, it's sort of here today, but it's gone tomorrow, and it will never last. And I find it's, for a lot of artists, it's quite scary, because they say, well, I don't know if I want to make something that will last so long. But I think it keeps you, thinking about that, meditating on that idea that you are leaving something behind, and you at least hope or aspire to leave something behind that can hopefully touch other people, or can speak to other people when you're gone. And it's also a connection to the history and the time of which you were residing in. It's something that I think about very often, actually, is that the material in which you work, it should last. I think it should last. It acts as a record, shall we say?
Well, Fen, your philosophy around something that lasts, and something that almost serves as a story, a capsule for a story in itself, or a carrier of a story in itself. I mean, that strikes a chord with me, seeing as I love the idea of inheriting items from your ancestors that this was this ancestor's knife, or this ancestor's rifle, or this ancestor's book or Bible.
Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, a short, very quick example of that was when we went on our Northern Cape expedition now this April. I took along on this camping trip a kettle, a little iron kettle that used to be my great-grandmother's. It used to stand in her kitchen. And it comes from a time where it isn't made for dainty, like safe kitchen, where nothing, it's made for, it's going to be put on a coal stove. It's going to be nicked. It's going to be hit. It's going to fall. It's made tough, and it's made to be used in a rough way. It's not made for soft, like plastic kitchens. But the great thing about that is it has all this character. There's all these little scratches, all these little dents, all these little pieces of character in it. And I can only imagine what happened to it in its past life. I mean, exactly. I can just imagine. Your mind fills in the gaps on its own, whether it's accurate or not. You see the little dent in it, and you just think maybe your great-grandmother dropped it, or it nicked on something. But that's the storytelling of an inanimate object. Absolutely, that's exactly what you're describing here through your work. The only difference is, with that inanimate object, it's not deliberate. With your work, you're deliberately trying to create something that also tells a story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think what is so fantastic is when you look historically at the works that have come down to us now, let's say from the sculpture to, you've mentioned it before, like a rifle or anything like this, these things that come down to us now, they tell a story in the sense of, perhaps with a piece of sculpture, something's come off it or something's broken off it. But in many respects, that record of time adds to the glory of that work, or the glory of that artifact or object, because it is that recording of time in the piece, which, as you say, continues to tell a story. I think when we look at, for example, ancient Greek sculpture, or Roman work, or these works that come down to us now, the charm of a piece, even just missing half a face, or the charm of this sort of beautiful piece that is maybe missing an arm, it doesn't take away, it hasn't damaged or destroyed that piece. Okay, perhaps it's a shame that a section's missing, but you can still see that that sort of glory is still shining through that work. You know what I'm saying? It's still there. I think it actually brings me onto an interesting idea, because there was a story, I mean, whether or not it's absolutely true, but there was something along the lines of Michelangelo, when he was carving his sculptures, he would always leave sections of it that would never be absolutely finished, like as in, perfectly finished. He would enjoy to still leave elements of it unfinished. And the general line of the story was that he enjoyed that aspects of the stone was not completely finished and smoothed off, because he liked, and he said in his own words, that it allowed for eternity to shine through. And I thought that was such an extraordinary thing, because it's like it's still allowing that process. Time is still running through it. The process is still going on. And I think sculpture and works that are left to us continue to tell that story now. I mean, I found it a very sort of charming story. I mean, whether or not it's absolutely accurate or not, but I found it very interesting.
Yeah, well, this was not a topic that I put in my notes, but I mean, just this idea of already storytelling through the imprints of reality on an item. I mean, there's so many examples. I'm just going to name two because I also don't want to get stuck on this, but it's such a fascinating aspect of it. A bronze statue, some bronze statues, you can see where the public touches it. So, for example, you have like a bronze statue of its hand outstretched, and then its hand is shiny and the rest is like just dull. So I can already tell you, without seeing what people do, I can tell you what they do. They go up and shake the statue's hand, or they take a picture where it looks like they're holding his hand, or they are reaching out to the statue. Already I can deduce that just from seeing the statue in that regard. The best example is when you see statues of animals, bronze statues of animals, of like a dog, and its head is always shiny, because it tells the story. You don't have to see people do the action. You know what they're doing with the statue. It tells that story. And it's the same thing with items that are not art, but an item like a piece of furniture that you can see has been looked after very well, wooden furniture that's been looked after very well, that's almost 100 years old. I mean, there's so many stories that can be told, even by non-artistic works, even though there is an art in its creation. I mean, I've got a second-hand table in my living room that I bought at a hospice in Malmesbury that used to belong to the main police, the head of the police station in the town 100 years ago. And I know that story because they told me that at the hospice, because the person that dropped it off, they told them this is the story. And now I've got it in my house, and I bought it for dirt cheap, but it's an old wooden table. Again, it's that theme of the storytelling that lingers within the object, and that's why it's so great the materials that you use, because they're perfect for it.
Yeah, I mean, what essentially what you're talking about is this object then takes on the spirit of that story. You know, it's that story is now giving that object further sort of life in that you can recall, and you can think, if only this object could tell you a story of the conversations that were had around that table. You know, I mean, that is something that I often think about. If we could, in some respect, like a cassette player, if we could play back objects and just you know, what have they seen? What have they been through? An extraordinary thing. Yeah, it's wonderful that you managed to pick up a table like that. That's great.
I mean, just take one of your statues. If it's been standing in an art gallery for a long while, imagine if you could take it after 20 or 30 years, and then you just play back all the conversations of people discussing it around it.
I know.
That would be incredible.
That would honestly be an extraordinary thing. Perhaps it would be a little bit scary as well at times.
Yeah, we can only imagine it. So one of the other topics one of the driving topics that why I wanted to talk to an artist specifically is a topic that, and specifically now you that creates statues. I've got this growing frustration with Western conservatives and people on the right and the West that whenever the left builds another horrible or ugly statue or piece of public art, they just write 50 opinion pieces about how ugly the piece of art is. But I can't name you one statue or piece of public art that has been created by people on that side of the political spectrum in Europe or in America in the last 20 years. In South Africa, I can name you examples that the Afrikaners, through the Solidariteit movement and AfriForum, are doing. We're building statues, we're building monuments and preserving monuments, but also building new ones. But all I see in the West are conservatives writing opinion piece on opinion piece on opinion piece and podcast on podcast on podcast about how ugly the art of their opponents is.
Yeah.
That's not vitalizing. That's tapping you. That's sucking your energy. That's not giving you any energy.
No. I mean, you are. I'm so glad you bring this up, of course, because this is partly one of the battlefields that I'm continuously going in on in Twitter. Is there is a number of accounts now with huge amounts of followers who will indeed, there's some monument arrives somewhere and it looks hideous. It's a terrible piece of work, and you will just see with thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people are mentioning and saying, "Oh, it's just so bad. What's happening? And oh, what are we going to do about it?" And it's
lamenting
awful.
the art, just lamenting the site. But
and they're constantly saying, "Oh, this is awful," and blah blah blah. And indeed, I have exactly the same opinion where I think, we can keep on dwelling just how bad, and we can reside in this place of almost victimhood, which I think is a terrible position to be in, and say, oh, the art around us is just so terrible and it's not getting any better, and look at this hideous monument and blah blah blah. But I mean, I wrote a thread about this where I said, essentially, a lot of these people, they sit on the sidelines and they're waiting for some great art to come along. But the answer is, it's not going to happen, because you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and start getting something going ourselves. It's not going to be a case of, oh, but we just wish there was some good art. No, look, we're here now. We can make that change. We can literally come together. We could bring a series of different artists and sculptors, and we could set up a commission where a series of different people can put ideas forward, and we can formulate sketches and models and maquettes, and we can say, look, what could go to this space, and we could have something that's truly glorious or life affirming, or something that's really great, and then from there we could find some funding for it, and then we can put it up. I mean, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be the beaten wife in this situation, which is what I find unfortunate, is the position that a lot of conservatives take, is that they just kind of, well, look at how bad things are. It's like, it's bad, but we could make it a hell of a lot better if we could just come together and really organize and get something going. I mean, I know that you've spoken.
And it's not illegal.
No.
It's not illegal to create beautiful things.
You're not no one's going to be breaking the law here. I'm not asking you to go out there and commit crimes. It's simply just.
But it sounds like it is. It sounds like it's against the law, and you're going to get 20 years in prison if you dare put up even a half decent statue.
Yeah, exactly. And the focus of my tweets and a number of my threads has been to say, look, guys, we can actually turn this around, and just think about how glorious it could be if we were to start making steps in the other direction. And you don't have to be the victim in this. I know you've mentioned on previous different occasions this idea of building alternative institutions, or building a sort of a group of people that just take another road. Yes, that's exactly what we need to be doing. Exactly what needs to be happening in America and Europe. There needs to be people who are willing to band together and start showing another way through different alternative galleries, through different arts institutions. It can be small to start with. It doesn't have to be some massive thing. It can be just a small collective that is starting to show another way. Every great art movement and every great collective of the past started off tiny, with just a small group of people, and that's where it begins. I mean, this is partly what I'm already in the process of doing with some of the artists I've met through Twitter. I mean, we are already at this very moment putting together and planning an exhibition.
Yeah,
and that's the first
pool
step.
Your resources and create, just to be able, just the first attempt. Your only goal with the first attempt should be to prove that you can do it. The first attempt should not be to make the headline of the New York Times, or to even have any papers or anyone report on it. Just to be able to have proof of concept in reality.
Exactly.
Yes, we did it and it was possible. And then the next one you make bigger and better. But the first one's only goal should be to show that it's possible. Because at the moment, it seems people don't believe it's possible. It's either impossible or it's illegal. That's what they believe.
Yeah, exactly. And it is this kind of very, I think the problem is I think when a group of people en masse believe that they have been losing for so long, they take the position of the loser. But that is deadly. That is the worst thing you should do. In a position where you feel like you're perhaps losing ground, or you're having a hard time, you should start saying, look, this energizes me to move. Now's the time to start going. Now's the time to start moving. It's not about saying, oh, but it's just getting so bad, and what are we going to do? And look, another terrible statue. No, let's change. Let's change that. I mean, just think for a second. Whenever I see these posts about how terrible these statues are, and I see hundreds or thousands of comments, if one of those people, of all those thousands of comments, if you asked each one of them to donate $1, $1 towards creating something of glory, my God, you could have an extraordinary change. I mean, you could crowdfund something. You could set up competitions. You could try and find the best sculptors who could come forward and submit some ideas and works. And from there, you could literally start building an entire series that is crowdfunded by a movement that want to see something else. You know what I'm saying? And it's not so hard to get going, guys. It's really not.
Yeah, but I mean that's human psychology for you. They only believe it when they see it, and that's why I said the goal first just be to show it's possible. I see
Well, that's
Gert
exactly
van Rensburg says, I can appreciate Fen's point. I forge knives from leftover pieces of metal, and people don't realize the effort to make each one unique and useful. Well, amazing. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
But
That's the thing.
Don't keep your art to yourself. You have to share it. You have to put it out there so it can inspire other people.
This is the thing, I constantly talk about the importance of being busy with your hands. It's being busy with your hands and learning how to make, and that can start off in the most humble of ways. I feel like so many people in this modern era that we reside in have lost the ability to make, and I think that's a huge tragedy, because we've lost the touch with the material. Of course, as humans, throughout the ages, we have been able to create. We've made our own tools. We've made our own. We've made everything with our hands. If you lose that connection,
since the dawn of time, we've also been making not just those tools. We've been trying to make them aesthetic as well. You see engraved tools. You see an effort to make them. Why do you think that is? Why are our ancestors wasting their time trying to make something practical at the same time aesthetic to the best of their abilities? There must be something in it.
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, people instinctually and rather intuitively know the importance of an aesthetic within an object, within an art piece, because it speaks and it nourishes the soul. That is the importance of these things. And of course, if you lose the connection to that, then you lose a great part of life and being in itself. You lose that humanity and that connection to material. This is one of the reasons why I just love to be carving stone or working with bronze. I mean, when I get to the foundry and I can melt down and pour bronze with other guys that I'm working with, it's an incredible feeling. It's again working with materials. You're engaged in that process. This is something that becomes more and more rare by the day. I encourage all people, if they can, even in the most humble of ways, to get making things. It is really key. It's really key.
Well, I did an entire stream just called Build, Plant, Create. Just create, but don't just create or build something. Share it with other people. Show it to them. That's going to give it take it to the next level. But on the note of keeping things in regards of showing people that it is possible, I'd like to show off actually one of the statues that the Solidariteit movement has built. So let me just check here. I'm always very slow with the screen sharing, but here we go. So this is on the campus of Soltech, the technical college that we started. Let me see if I can make it.
That's a big bronze work, no?
Yeah. So it's a bronze statue honoring the. Let me just check. It's the biggest I can make it for now. So it's a bronze work honoring the. In Afrikaans, you'd say the vakmanne, the tradesmen, and their influence on the Afrikaners' history. because this is a trade school, it's a technical
Yeah.
college.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
an attempt to again show that there is pride in the trades as well. And so we built a
Yes.
statue,
That's
honoring the
fantastic.
trades,
That
and
is epic.
it's built on a foundation of a stone that they excavated from the dirt where the college is built, and it's a massive granite stone, and they just used that as the base for the statue because it was
Fantastic.
this massive object in the obstacle in the way, and said, well, then we'll honor this object that we conquered by making it part of the centerpiece, and it's at the very middle of the entire campus.
That's
So every day,
fantastic.
tradesmen students, or those trade students, walk in, they see the statue honoring their craft.
That is fantastic. That's great. I mean, you know, again, this comes back to that the thing I often talk about is, you know, you within a piece of sculpture, you instill an archetype. I mean, they're showing, from what I can read on the small picture there, it's showing the hammer and the chisel and the hands around it. I mean, symbolically, it's all there. It's showing that physical act on the material and with the tools.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, I mean, that's great. I'm always happy to see, you know, things like this. That's fantastic that people came together and they got that done. I mean,
it's a statue based on one of the most famous Afrikaans poems about basically art and the impact that art can have. And you'll appreciate this. It's in Afrikaans, but I'll send you a translation of it. I'll do a translation after the stream. But it's by MP van Wyk Louw, and it's called Die Byteltjie. It's called The Chisel. And it's about a man or an artist chiseling away.
Yeah.
And his art has such a big impact that his small little chisel, in the end splits the entire world in two.
Fantastic.
And that's the message behind that specific statue as well. But yeah, maybe I want to stay on this topic before we move on. That whole impact of a public statue, and you are, as someone that creates statues for public display, why is there, in ancient times as well, why is there always a statue in the middle of a town or in the middle of a city? Why is there always a statue in a public place, almost as if it fulfills a very specific role, this piece of art, to almost inspire those around it and that see it every day to try something greater? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the point of having, you know, large pieces of sculpture outside in public spaces, if you look throughout history, it's been to capture an archetype or a principle that is held dear to those people, that is upheld above just the standard elements of life, and it's upheld as something important, something that should have focus, something that collectively people can say, yeah, that resonates with us, that speaks to us. And that is a place where we focus our thought and our mind, because it almost becomes a spiritual anchor, should we say? And you see that a lot with you know, public art, at least more in the past, public art, where you would have, you know, a certain thinker or a certain poet, or even just sculptures that represent an aspect of a story or an aspect of an archetypal element that resonates with those people. And this is all part of having touchstones around cities or villages or towns or whatever you have, these touchstone points where collectively people say, oh, yes, that's us. That's who we are. That resonates with our soul. That resonates with our culture. That resonates with our people. And so that is something that is a piece of sculpture acts as a continuous story that is forever told in a solid and static material that continually plays that music to the surrounding area and the surrounding place in which people walk, live, or work. That was the power of what sculpture held. You know, I think little by little, we start to reconnect with that importance, especially as we now see so many of our public spaces filled with absolute trash, stuff that speaks to nothing other than, you know, some kind of made up nonsense.
Political fad of the week.
Exactly.
It's going to be unintelligible in 2 or 3 generations.
Exactly. It's not timeless. You know, there's so many of the great statues and the great work that have come down to us. They still resonate with us. We can still look to them. I mean, just even if you're just looking at Greek sculpture or Roman work, or these things that
2,000 years later.
they still speak to us, whether it is some kind of athlete from Greece that you look at and say, wow, look at the glory of those forms, look at the perfect beauty and balance of how that's put together, and there's an ideal there that speaks to the brilliance of a healthy body that people look to and say, that's glorious. I love that. And so a lot of people, because it speaks on a more intuitive level, of course, sculpture speaks on less of the intellectual level, less on the theory level. It speaks to us in a on that intuitive grounding. People will look at it and say, I love it, but I don't know why. Because it speaks to something deep within them. That is the power of art. That is the power of it.
That's the reaction I get from, I would almost go as far to say, as everyone, when I ask them, why do you like your favorite painting? Well, I just love it. They're not going to give you some thesis. They're not going to say, like, give you a video essay. They're just going to tell you, I love it. It makes me feel a certain way. It makes me feel inspired, or it makes me feel, it just makes me feel appreciative, or whatever. It's almost like the yes meme. It's not a thesis on why they like. There's a yes, I like it.
Yes, exactly.
And they can't really explain why. And it's with paintings, it's with specifically more abstract stuff like statues as well. Sometimes a painting, you can give the reason of, like, I love how it captures the South African landscape, or it has a nostalgic feel to it, or but I mean, just a statue of the human body. Why are you going? How are you going to explain why one statue of a man or a woman is more artistic or powerful to you than any other? It's just something inherent and deep in it that you can't explain sometimes. Sometimes it is just the yes meme. Sometimes it isn't. There's no explanation.
Yeah, because, and I always find those responses wonderful from people, because I think what they are feeling is an entirely intuitive and aesthetic response to a piece of work. And so much of our time now has been spent with trying to theorize and put words to these things. But trying to theorize and put words to art that speaks to you intuitively is simply going to act as a corrosive measure. It's going to get in the way of the intuitive response. So something that I talk about hugely within my own art circles is the importance of the intuitive response. Don't let someone try and pull the wool over your eyes with some kind
Explain why this is beautiful for 5 marks.
With some kind of nonsense like that, because the language of an artist, be it a painter or a sculptor, he's working on that intuitive response. He's working on, or she's working on that feeling of saying, I'm looking at this piece, or I'm looking at this form, and I'm modeling it, or I'm shaping it, and it's about to feel right. There comes to that point when you look at a piece of sculpture and you say, it feels right. It feels correct. It's done. You can step away. It feels correct. And you don't have to put a big story to it. I mean, of course, there are stories that are involved in sculpture, but you don't have to tell a story when you're speaking the aesthetic language. You don't have to do a big song and dance about it. In fact, I was looking at the small, there's this small and humble sculpture created that I see in Oranje, which is
the little giant.
There you go. And he's pulling up his sleeve. And there is that incredible, I mean, it's so humble and simple, and the directness of that just shows pulling up the sleeve, and we're getting things done, and it's about pushing forward, and you're ready to work, you're ready to get stuff moving. That speaks to a number of the people part of that community. That speaks to them, and they need that. That's important because it speaks to their spirit, and that is the power of art. That is something that I continually go back to, is the power there and where it resides.
Sideline opinions in the chat shares a quote. He says, "Art is more godlike than science. Science discovers, art creates," by John Opie. Yeah, well,
there you go.
I mean, the Iranians also understand the importance. I mean, that's one. I mean, I visited Irania over a decade ago already for the
Yeah.
first time. And I remember
Mm,
the statue was already there. It was one of the first things they put up was
right.
that little statue. It wasn't something
Yeah.
that was put up yesterday. They knew the importance of we need beautiful art, public art as well. And they constantly in that town incentivizing the creation of public art as well, beautifying the community and the environment. That's it's such an alien concept contrast to the what we see in America and Europe, where you just have again this approach. We're going to fix this all with just another opinion piece about how ugly the world is. One more 3-hour conversation. I mean, that's what we could have done. We could have sat
Yeah.
here for an hour talking
Yeah.
about putting up some of the most ugly recent statues that we can think of, laughing
Yep.
at it, scoffing at it. But at the end of that episode, I would have been tired. I would not
Of
have
course.
felt rejuvenated or inspired. I would have just felt drained, and my audience would have as well. I can guarantee you that.
Sure. It's not a place. I don't think it's a place to rest our vision going forward. I think going forward with the problems that we face now, it's more in the spiritual place that we are having huge issues. And I think if people can connect and reconnect to the power of art, the power of strong culture, but also the heroic in culture, the heroic in art, I think is of vital importance, because so much of the general macro story that is being told now is the cult of the victim, or the cult of the, you name it, sort of going down to the lowest common denominator. And it's about applying to that. Now, that is not a particularly high vibration to be in. If you're placing your thoughts in that realm, which is a lot of what the sort of regime art of today has you putting your focus on, you're not going to have a particularly heroic culture overall. And of course, that's what we're seeing. You see lots and lots of people, and I understand that there's a huge amounts of people now who are crying out for culture and art that speaks to something more primal and stronger and that resides more within the heroic. I think the heroic is a fascinating aspect of culture. If you look through some of the great stories, the epic poems, the great art that have come down to us, one can look at that and say that there is very often this embodiment of the hero and the heroic, and this standing up and living a glorious life, a noble life, and being someone that can ascend out of the darkness and defeat it and bring others with them. And that is an incredible story, but it's been banished from so much of our culture and art. You only ever now really see it in sort of basic things like the comic book, or let's say sort of like superhero films. That's kind of the place where it sort of resides. Outside of that, when it comes to the fine art world, no, it's got to be about the cult of the victim, the cult of the minority, and all this kind of nonsense that is being pushed through so much of American and European cultural stream. And on the macro question, what can art dwell on, or what can art fixate on in these times? I think one of the most revolutionary things is, first of all, to actually make things, and second of all, to start bringing glory to life, to bringing glory to the hero and glory to this period, and saying it can be great again. It doesn't have, you don't have to be in this position of you're defeated or you're the beaten wife. It can be glorious again. That's the thing that I wake up in the morning thinking about this time that we're in, and I think you can be thankful of it as well, because out of this, there will be people who will be remembered, and it is your opportunity now to be remembered as someone who stood in this time, didn't lie down, who stood and actually did something. And what a great opportunity. What an extraordinary opportunity. Take it. It's a gift. It's a gift to be taken. Now is the time to do things.
Yeah, well, that's what I keep telling my audience as well. Both hard and good times come with their benefits and costs. Good times, the advantage of living in good times is you have the ample opportunity to live a comfortable life. But the advantage of living in hard times is you have ample opportunity to live a great life.
That's it.
You have to keep that in perspective.
I think that's so important to keep in mind.
there's a comment here that I wanted to highlight that I think captures it very well as well. So Trace Kujranada says public art can be seen thousands of times an hour every day during every day of people's regular lives. It has a subtle permeating effect on psyche, positive or negative. It's pretty much a billboard. It's a aesthetic billboard that's just as a billboard is advertising very bluntly some product into your subconscious. A beautiful statue or a beautiful building or a beautiful piece of public art is broadcasting a message of you need to strive to be better. You need to create beauty just like the beauty you see here. It inspires people unconsciously without them even knowing it. But that comes back to that point you made, Fen, about specifically the intuitive. Where if people have to walk up to the statue and read the description below it, it's failed. Then it's not having that effect. If they have to go read what it's about, or they have to, after they've seen it, they went to the art gallery, they didn't understand the art, so they have to go read like 3 or 5 blog posts about midwits explaining to them why this art means what it means, or why this little blotch on the piece of paper actually is a critique of industrial society or whatever. It's if it doesn't jump out at you, that message, then in my very frank opinion, I think the piece of art has failed. If you have to go read a thesis or a PhD on what the message of a piece of, or how this piece of art is supposed to make you feel, I mean, then the artist has failed. I can't put it really in softer terms. It doesn't deserve to be put in soft terms.
No, I completely agree. I mean, on that note, I think it's very important to see art as a if we look through historical terms, art is a great anchor point to see where the civilization has been spiritually. And one can say that if we look through, I suppose this is why so many conservatives always reference like the Renaissance period. They always reference, oh, we need to go back to the Renaissance period. But I think what a lot of conservatives, let's say, overlook in their thinking, and I don't blame them for this, but I think a lot of the position they overlook is that the great art in those periods was born out of a time when there was a certain spiritual maturity taking place in that civilization. And one can now look at this time as a period where a civilization is past its maturity, shall we say, and it is very clearly in a position of decline on a certain series of levels, certainly on a spiritual one, perhaps not on a material one, because if you look at all the technological aspects of things, it still marches forward, but spiritually there's nothing there. And you can see that in the architecture around us. We can see that in a lot of the arts going on around us. And if one was to say that an artist or the artist's role in such a period is to reflect its time, then many of the artists are certainly reflecting just how bad things are. So in one respect, you could look at, my God, these certain artists are reflecting just how bad things are. But I look at it on the other sense that an artist can also reflect at just how powerful and glorious things can still be, or how one can still throw it forward and say, if you focus your energy here, we could march forward into something far more in a more spirited line of things, far more connected to a root. And so I do think about that quite regularly, in fact, when you look at the architecture, or you look at the sculpture, or you look at the art in our time. But I think that a lot of the artists who have given into it are part of the victimization of what's going on. They've accepted just how bad things are, and they're running with it. And I think the best thing to do is to not do that. I think it's good to be able to still stand apart and not just run with it. Because even if you don't speak to a large group, you'll still speak to those who are aware of what's going on today. That is important.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Just as Solzhenitsyn in his famous quote said that one word of truth outweighs the entire world, I think one work of great art can outweigh an entire tyrannical regime. I mean, I might be speaking romantically, but I definitely view art and its impact on society in that way. I mean, and it again comes back to that intuitive influence that it has on people, where
Yeah.
You can influence millions of people through the sight of your art, and you don't even have to tell them your ideology or your view of the future or what you're trying to achieve. You can do all of that within an effective piece of art.
Absolutely.
All of that is can be captured, I should rather say, within an effective piece of art. But
Totally agree.
people don't understand it. People are still, well, the left understands it very well. They understand if you want to demoralize a society, you give it
Yeah.
ugly art, and if you create an ugly world, they will start feeling demoralized and blackpilled, and that's exactly what they're trying to do. But then naturally, your instincts should be telling you we should be countering it then with the opposite. But that's the thing is people specifically conservatives and people on the right need to start understanding that you can make a massive impact on the zeitgeist or the tijdsgeest, the
Yeah.
spirit of your time and the artistic and aesthetic character of your time through creating beautiful, powerful art.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think the issue taking place these days could be rather rapidly turned around if there could just be certainly the spirit of what you're fully aware of in SA, which is the working together and the banding together.
Mm.
If there could be more of that across Europe and America, and we could really be able to collectivize, it wouldn't particularly matter because we could build our own institutions culturally, and people can carry on doing the sort of nonsense they're doing while we create something that is far more vital, something that has far more power and far more fire in the belly. I put a huge amount of belief in the power structure that one can have behind a few noble men coming together and really forming strong networks. There's not much that can really shake that. I think there's from that you can start feeding into far more vitalist culture, and you can start supporting it, and it won't matter with what's going on. And then it makes me again think back in history when art movements came along from the outside and enveloped and took over another movement in philosophy, and something more glorious came along or changed or whatever. That can happen again. It doesn't have to be set in stone or concrete to how many people feel that it is. It's just that there isn't a I suppose we haven't come to that realization yet that we must band together. Until there is a stronger banding together of people, I don't think much of this will necessarily change. It is going to be out of absolute necessity that we start to push for that, as the next years unfold. And I think we will push for that because it really is the only way that we're going to have a chance.
It's the only way you have a chance in a post-political world. And I'm so glad that transition in thought is happening, specifically in our ranks, where people are realizing you're not going to vote yourself out of this, but you can get yourself out of this. It's I keep reminding my audience and people that read my work know, an energized minority will always defeat a silent majority. You can do a lot with a very small collective of well-organized people.
Yeah.
But too little people understand it. They all are still stuck in this modern idea that you can only change and influence the world if you are a massive voter base of millions that vote in a certain direction. It's the only way. Like, no, you can change the world with a strong, organized, small group or a minority of people that are energized and know what they are, where they come from, and where they're going.
Exactly. This is something that I've mentioned so many times on Twitter. And people will look to me, and maybe they're from America, or perhaps they're living in Europe, and they'll say stuff to me like, "Oh, but this dream that you have of an alternative culture, it will never happen because we'll have to vote that in." I'm like, guys, why are we still talking about voting?
In the alternative culture?
Why are we still talking about voting? Why are we waiting for some leader or some kind of politician to come along that's going to change this for us? It isn't going to happen. Get that frame out of your mind. This is why I say I'm not I don't reside in the political. I'm not interested in the politics. I'm interested in real life. I'm interested in what's going on in the real fabric, the real fabric of life. The real fabric of life is between people, that happens out on the street or in the countryside or wherever among people. It's people coming together and taking care of things and pushing forward and being energized by the culture that we that comes out of us. That's what you reconnect with. You don't have to wait for some leader or oh, we have to try and get him into power, and then somehow it's like, why? These guys are bought and paid for. That when they arrive in power, they're only going to do what their donors are going to be, paying them to do. Why would you ever wait for these clowns? I mean, I have no time for this kind of thinking. I think it is it's a waste of time, and as you say, we're far past that. I mean, you guys, you see that in SA, but I would say we're far past it here in Europe. We're far past it in America. What are we waiting for? You waiting for some leader to come along? I mean, come on.
You're gonna be waiting until everything is destroyed, and then you're gonna just lament the fact that they didn't show up. But that's in the central point that I think as we start wrapping up here, that's also important to maybe end on is. It might be a little bit of a critical way to end, but I need to make this frank point regardless, and that's the fact that it's excuse making at the end of the day. It's being able to tell yourself, I don't have to do anything. I'm not artistic or strong or smart enough to make a difference. So I'm waiting for that heroic Caesar figure or whatever to appear like a mythical hero on the horizon, and he's going to come save me. All I have to do, my biggest sacrifice, is I have to go stand in a line for 20 minutes and make a little pencil X or pen X on a piece of paper. And then I can go home and I can pat myself on the back because I did my duty towards my civilization. And then I can crack open a beer and watch the television and see if whether my candidate won or didn't, and can see whether I have a future or not. That's the mentality. And I can explain it. To me, it's the most bizarre mindset, seeing as I come from now a country where we've completely been disillusioned with party politics, specifically as Afrikaners. So for me, it's already apparently bizarre. But a lot of people will listen to me describe it like that and say, no, you're oversimplifying it. It's not that simple. It's actually quite different. The only way to change the future is through these party politic mechanisms. I'm like, well, okay, you can continue. I mean, 100th times the charm, right? I mean, it's going to work one of these days. You just have to vote harder, have to make that X harder, drive your hand and all your force into that little piece of paper and make your little X and see what happens. But like I said, even though it is a critical point, I actually want to end on a sobering note. No, I think it's necessary.
I think I always keep this very close to my heart. And, the point that you're making is a realist point. The point that you're making is you're just outlining the basic game as rigged. So, why do you keep playing at that casino? There's no point. Get out. The thing is, the thing that I've often advocated for is mad hat thinking. You've got to be dynamic. You've got to be creative. You've got to start joining and forming groups and coming together and, bringing forward what you love and what speaks to you culturally. Whether it be from poetry, from music, from whatever you want to listen to, something that gives you, that life energy in this time, because that's going to get you through this. Other than that, you just need to start forming groups and coming together and really, I think, holding art and culture as the important lifeline here, because that's what binds people together. That's what we can really, really unite on. And from there, everything else will take care of itself. I don't think you have to be, you mentioned this point and you think that it's somewhat of a negative one. I think it's actually more, I think it's more of an uplifting one, actually. It's simply just you're exposing exactly what's going on. And from that point forward, it doesn't matter. We have the power and we have the ability to move forward here. We are not stuck and we have the power. I think that's, if people can fully unite with that again, then nothing will really matter.
Yeah, but and here's the thing: we're not. I keep using the metaphor of we're not selling rhetorical candy to people. We're selling them rhetorical medicine. It's very difficult what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, of course.
Because the message we're giving people basically is you're going to have to start taking responsibility and get busy and get active and get involved. That's
course.
not the
Yeah.
message people want to hear. They want to hear, and this is how we got into this mess, is the absolution of or the absolvement of any responsibility by forces that told people that you don't have to worry about your own security. You don't have to worry about the preservation of your society. You don't have to worry about art. You don't have to worry about creating all these different things. People much smarter and stronger and more influential than you will handle it. You just relax, go sit there, have a beer, watch the show, go to a circus, how to get some bread, and you'll enjoy it. And generations of people fell for that increasingly, and that's how we got here. But it's the type of narrative that's easy to sell, the narrative that tells people you don't have to take responsibility personally. You can't possibly have an impact on the culture. You can't possibly have an impact on the aesthetics of your time. Leave it up to the smart people. And the heroes. They'll figure it out. But what we're saying is, you're going to, in your own humble capacity, you're going to have to do it. One final point on that thought. I made this point the other day on a podcast when I was talking about realistic solutions. I told them, if you donate $5 towards, like, for example, like we said, towards a art gallery that's not mainstream or something grassroots, you are already doing more than 90% of other people out there. So don't tell yourself there's nothing I can do. By dedicating 10 minutes or 20 minutes a week to perfecting an artistic craft, you're already doing more than 80% of people out there, maybe even more, maybe 90%. So don't tell yourself that lie of like, I don't have the capacity to make a difference. By doing minimal effort, you are already doing more than the vast majority of people out there. And that thought needs to start hitting home. People need to start understanding that through the small difference you can make, you make a big difference.
No, absolutely. You know, it's something that I've mentioned, even just the banding together. Look, the art movements of the past that brought incredible changes in the cultural scenes. They started out as like 5 guys bringing together
a coffee shop somewhere.
You know, 5 guys having a drink, and then it was from there. It was like, hey, we could do an exhibition, and we could make it like this, and it could be like that, and that dream snowballed, and more and more people started to get involved and get interested in a certain way of pushing forward with a certain arts movement or group. And from that moment on, poets, songwriters, people started to band together, and it just snowballed. And that's how you have a movement and a new change and another vitalistic way forward that is able to give people what they need in the time that they reside in. You know, that's the thing.
Well, Fen, I think that's a great way to almost end it, because I'm going to give you one final question, and it's the question, or like the themed question of the podcast or the show, is if you can implant an idea in the audience for this week at the back of their mind, something that they will be able to chew on, that maybe in 2 or 3 days it just flashes into their consciousness again, and they think about what you said, or a question, or anything. It can be a reiteration of something we already said. It can be a rhetorical question. It can be a simple thought. It can be a long thought. Anything. If you got the opportunity now to implant something at the back of the audience's mind to chew on this week, what would you plant there?
The thing that I often keep in my mind, and it is something we spoke about, is essentially it doesn't matter always that you need a like an absolutely huge mass or group of people to start really making a change in the culture or the society that we are in. If you have a passionate and energized group of people which can act as a small flame in the darkness, then, you know, from there that light grows, and as that light grows, you're able to see more clearly as we push forward. And I don't think that we can look back at really all historical movements have started out so minuscule and small, and you can see that they just build momentum, and as you build that momentum, nothing will stand in the way. And I think that is something to keep in mind. It's the small drip, and from there things can really get going. And so if people can keep in mind that all of this will be a humble beginning, but it will turn into a absolutely fierce, momentous movement moving forward. I don't think you know. I think there's a lot there to be kept in our thoughts.
Yeah, a match can start a wildfire. I think that's what we have to keep in mind.
It.
Well,
That's
Fen,
it.
thank you very much for your valuable time. Thank you for sharing your experience in this field of art and some of your thoughts that I can see. You wake up in the morning and you think about this topic. So I'm very glad that you were able to share that with us, with me and the audience here tonight. Finally, it's not really a question, just an opportunity. Where can people find your work? Where do you want to direct them? Show your content.
I think in many respects, the best place to find me is on Twitter. So on Twitter, you can just find me Fen de Villiers on Twitter. And
there's a
from
link
there,
in the description for the lazy people that don't want to go type it in, and people that might struggle to spell it. It's there. Just go click on it. There's also a link that's your, I think it's your link tree that goes to all your other links. That's in the description as well. But yeah, I think that's Twitter would be the best place as well. I think
indeed. Well, thanks for having me on.
And I hope you have an excellent week. And then lastly, thank you very much for everyone that tuned in. Thank you for all your great comments, and thank you for all your questions and all your inputs that I could put on the screen. That also forms part of this little time capsule conversation now that's being, as long as the internet is around and as long as the site is around, will be preserved for the future. And I hope you all have an excellent week, excellent weekend, and take those words to heart of Fen there at the end of go take some initiative. Be that little match that starts maybe a bigger fire, and you can do it within. It is within you. Don't tell yourself that excuse of I'm not artistic or talented enough. I mean, you're going to have to refine those talents and refine what you have. But it's gonna, once you get there, you're going to be able to make a real impact. But Fen, one last thing. Thank you again for your time. I hope you have a great week, and we'll chat again real soon. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, and
thanks a lot.
God bless.